All right, here we go. We're live. So it's good to see you again, Russell.
Good to see you, Nick.
And that we first met at the Environmental Tech Summit, which took place this year in Raleigh. And I think, how did you hear about the Tech Summit? Who reached out to you?
I'm trying to think. Who's the guy that had the Enviro, the e-chain of custody?
Oh, that's Jim.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so
He reached out.
Okay, cool.
He and I have been connected on LinkedIn for a couple of years. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So because of the related aspects of your business, I suppose.
Correct. Yeah.
So I first met him on LinkedIn too.
Okay.
I met him in a environmental software group, which I don't know if he founded it. He might have started it.
Yeah.
But so yeah, I reached out to him initially with the idea. So I love LinkedIn and all this new technology and how we can connect across the country and across the globe. But I mean, mostly it's people in the country.
Right.
So now you run a company called SampleServe.
Correct.
And before we get into that, though, it's an environmental company. You do some really interesting things. I want to talk about who you are beyond that. Like, you know, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Well, I grew up in southern Michigan, a little town called Montgomery. Most people have never heard of it. It's about 200 people. But on the map, you can locate it by, it's basically, if you look at the state of Michigan, us Michiganders always bring our maps with us. And it's like halfway, right at the very bottom of the state, about halfway across. If you look at the border of Michigan, there's a little jog in the bottom of the state line. And right at the corner of Indiana, Ohio, Michigan. So I grew up right there, farming community. Graduated high school there, ended up going to Western Michigan University studying geology, and graduated in 1987 and started working in the environmental industry right out of college. So I've been working in it ever since. So yeah, that's how I got started in it. And in 1993, I started my own company. It was a consulting engineering company called Compliance Inc. So I was only 5 years out of college when I started my own company, which is kind of unusual. You know, not a lot of young people at that age. I guess more and more now in the software business they are, but back then it was pretty unusual to be so young, 5 years out of college and starting your own company. But I, started my own company and I haven't looked back since. I sold that company back in 2002 and I started, I had some patents in remediation systems. I started specializing in remediation systems, and then in 2002, they changed some regulations in the state of Michigan requiring low flow sampling. And so I recognized an opportunity there that people, weren't really familiar with how to do low flow sampling. So I thought, I'll start a company, specialize in it, and kind of been doing SampleServe.com then. That was one of my, I think I've always been kind of a forward-thinking guy, and I actually named the company SampleServe.com. And in 2002, that was pretty unusual to put the .com on the company name. And I kind of had the idea that we would eventually start putting our data online, develop a database, and so this SampleServe.com, the current the way we're formatted, has been an idea in the works for a long time. So.
Okay. So when I learned a little bit more about your company, I learned that you have two related but different services. Can you explain that?
Yeah. So we do two things. One, we specialize in collecting environmental samples. Most of the work we do is in groundwater sampling, groundwater monitoring well sampling. And then the other part of our service is the software. So we've got a software package. It's a web-based package right now. We're working on a mobile app. Should be finished in about January this year. That software basically takes all the data that we collect, plus takes the lab's data, and then generates all the tables, maps, graphs, charts, any way you can look at data visually, we're able to produce those kind of graphics in a matter of seconds. It's also kind of a project management tool. So if you've got a big project and you're, for instance, we've got a site in Arkansas where we got over 300 monitoring wells that we have to sample, and they're all sampled for something slightly different. Well, we're able to kind of set that up and then kind of manage. So when you go to a particular well, you know exactly what you're supposed to do on that well. We pre-print all the labels so that it makes sampling, a lot more efficient. So it's kind of a combination data management and project management software.
Okay. So you say that you started your company 5 years out of college, which I definitely agree is pretty unusual. And I think that these days there's a lot of talk about starting your own business, a lot of hype involved in it. And I think that a lot of people think it's a cool idea. I do too. But is it, what is it like to start your own business so young? I mean, why did you start your own business instead of working for somebody else?
Yeah. Well, as a matter of fact, I can recall almost exactly the moment when I decided I needed to be out on my own. There were some changes in the state of Michigan in terms of environmental regulations. This was, back in '93 when I first started my first company. And, this is pre-internet, so finding out information wasn't the same as we do it now. You couldn't just Google things. You had to kind of purposely look things up, or, kind of constantly be investigating new laws, new changes in regulations. Anyway, so I went to my bosses of this company I was working at, and basically said, hey, well, the governor just signed a new bill yesterday, and in 60 days we were playing by a whole new set of rules. And I figured that they had already knew like this was going on, and they were kind of dumbfounded, like, what do you mean? Like what? New rules, new regulations? I'm like, yeah, the bill that's been like debated on the House and Senate floor in Michigan for the last 2 months. I mean, it passed and the governor signed it yesterday, and it takes effect in 60 days. And they were like, what? They were just totally surprised. And it just occurred to me that my destiny was in their hands, and I just felt very uncomfortable with that. And that's literally when I'm like, I need to be on my own. I mean, like, I feel more comfortable with my destiny in my hands than in their hands. So that's really kind of the moment where I literally went home that night and started looking up, like, how do you incorporate a company? So.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And how did you get some of your first clients, being so young and having no prior experience?
Well, I basically just called up a client that I had actually brought to that company from a place I worked before, and just asked him. I said, hey, if I started my own company, would you give me some business? And he basically, this is exactly what his answer was. He said, Russell Schindler is my consultant. He goes, I don't care where he works. He's my consultant. And so that was my answer. And so, I knew, like, so all I had to do was start another company, and it's pretty unusual. I had basically we were making money right out the gate. I mean, I had to buy some insurance, but as soon as that was paid for, I was, cash flow positive.
That's cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
So what got you into environmental? I know you studied geology. Was it always your intention to do environmental?
Well, I graduated in 1987, and if you kind of look back at the history of petroleum exploration, 1987 was not a good year, kind of like it is now. It's like, oil prices were depressed, and so exploration just almost came to a standstill. So there was not, any jobs going on in the oil industry, any substantial, especially for a guy right out of college. So, but at the same time, environmental was kind of heating up. They had just passed some regulations regarding underground storage tanks not too much earlier than that. So there was this whole schedule when tanks had to be replaced. So obviously when you're digging up a bunch of tanks all over the country, there's a lot of environmental work that kind of came to light at that same time. So
Yeah.
So it was a hot and heavy industry back in the early 80s, the environmental industry.
Yeah, I hear about it and I read about it, and I wish this sounds like exciting times in the environmental industry.
Yeah, yeah.
But we hopefully we can see some more exciting times in the future involving technology and other things.
Yeah, I tell you, the way things are done back then to compare to the way they are done now is amazing to me. So back then it was just dig and haul.
Dig and haul. Well, that makes it really easy. I mean,
it does. Yeah, you know, you had to have guys like me just collecting the samples, tell you when to stop digging.
Right. Yeah. So now you've basically said that you've spent your whole career in environmental. So I was going to ask you, what other professions or jobs have you had, despite the fact that you've been in environmental all this time? Is there something else that you busy yourself with?
Well, I'm kind of a serial entrepreneur, so I've actually done a lot of different unrelated things. Probably the one I'm most known for is I had a charter boat operation in Traverse City. It was a catamaran sailboat, 47-foot boat, could carry 44 passengers. So that was a side business that I owned for about 10 years, and it was a lot of fun. Didn't really make a whole lot of money, but it made enough to, and, you know, and then the fun factor was there, so it was worthwhile hanging on for 10 years. But after 10 years of working every day, every summer, I decided to sell it. That was back in 2006 or 7, somewhere around there. So
wow. Okay. So you really are a serial entrepreneur. Anything else interesting?
I've had a log furniture company. Had a company that specialized in maintenance of remediation systems for a while, and that was pretty successful.
Oh, okay.
We called it O&M Inc.
O&M Inc. Okay.
O&M Inc. Yeah.
That's cool.
So, yeah.
So you're just that kind of guy. You want to be in charge of you want to be in charge of your destiny, and you've met enough people in charge who don't, that you've seen them and said, well, if that's the pinnacle, I know I can do better than that.
Yeah, I would actually say it's more about just a curiosity, you know, and probably a lack of fear of failure. A lot of people don't do things because they fear failure. I just think I was born without that fear gene, where I'm fine with failure. I tried something that didn't work, and I've had a lot of businesses. I've wasted a lot of money starting businesses that just didn't work, and that's okay. You know, I mean, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. You know, it's the fact that you tried, and then you learn every time you do that too. So yeah.
Well, I think that's important. I've heard it termed another way, sort of having the child mindset, where you approach life with curiosity, and you don't, because that's how you learn and that's how you are creative. If you're constantly thinking about, if you're constantly thinking small picture, then you can't see the big picture. So if you were engrossed entirely in just learning how to groundwater sample and dealing with your clients, I don't think that you would have been aware that there was environmental laws changing.
Right.
Or that, I mean, I know that a lot of people work, you know, they look for instruction, and they look for ways not to get in trouble. They don't necessarily look for opportunities for growth. And
Right.
I think that bosses don't want you to get in trouble. Bosses
Right.
don't want you to think about growth. That's their job, or that's their boss's job.
Right.
And so, you know, what are you doing the boss's job? You're only 27. Or what are you doing thinking that you can do that? You know, he's got 30 years in, you've got 5. You know, get your head out of the clouds and put your nose to the grindstone.
Well, that's kind of, you know, it goes back to the story I told about the environmental regulations changing. Some people look at that kind of change as like a threat. you know, so if environmental regulations are going to change and they perceive that automatically as a threat, I perceive those kinds of changes as opportunities. You know, I could be the first one to fully understand and grasp and be able to help our clients comply with those regs faster than everybody else. So if you look at, you know, obstacles as threats, then you're probably not cut out to be an entrepreneur. But if you look at obstacles as opportunities, then you are cut out to be an entrepreneur. So, and I've always just approached change as an opportunity.
That's great. That's great. I wonder if it has something, if it's something truly innate, or if it's something that you were, you know, that the environment you were raised in helped you to think in those terms.
Yeah, you know, maybe, you know, I know that both my parents, you know, they were divorced at a young age, but they both had very strong work ethics and kind of moved around a lot, but always had maintained positive attitude. And so, you know, I'm sure somehow that's related, but that goes way deeper than my knowledge of psychology and child rearing. So
sure. Well, you know, just trying to get at the core of
sure.
this.
Yeah.
And speaking of your parents, are your parents both from Michigan?
My mom actually is originally from Minnesota. My dad is from Michigan. So
Okay.
that's kind of how I ended up here. So, you know, basically graduated high school living with my dad. But I'm still real close to my mom. My mom's actually lived with me. You know, I had the charter boat I mentioned earlier. My mom was like the reservation booth person. So in the summertime when we ran the charter boat, it's up in northern Michigan. We don't run them year round, obviously. She would live with me and run the boat and run the reservations, and so I became pretty close with her.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now we've touched on your business a little bit, but I want you now to let you know what is your business? How is it involved with technology? How is it involved with you know, I think of your business as the Uber of groundwater sampling, but I imagine that without a little bit of context, people won't understand what I'm talking about.
Well, I like that analogy, actually. I'm going to use it. Uber of groundwater sampling. Huh. Yeah. Well, so you know, and when we get this app done, the best way to describe it is our entire package is a platform, right? So it's not just an app, it's not just a web-based thing, it's an entire platform. And the way we're building this out, I mentioned earlier, we're hoping to be done by January. Well, I say done is kind of we'll never be done, we'll always be working on it, but our main construction be done by January. So it'll be a platform that has a project management aspect of it, so you can log in on your desktop computer or laptop and set up a project and send that project in terms of work scopes to people who are going to be out doing the sampling. They'll be able to pull it up on their mobile app. That mobile app will allow you to print or enter all the data for sampling, and then when you're ready to collect a sample, it'll actually help you manage like low flow sampling, all that stuff. They'll have pictures of wells, whatever sample location. It doesn't necessarily have to be groundwater. It could be asbestos sampling. It's going to be an app for all kinds of sampling. But it'll then allow you to print labels in the field using a Bluetooth thermal label printer that's connected to that mobile device. And then the labels will have a barcode, and that barcode will tie back to the database in the cloud. So when all those samples arrive at the laboratory, they'll be able to just scan the barcode and then download all that data automatically. It'll happen. So we've kind of done some studies and done some analysis. So a typical cooler full of samples will take a lab about 30 minutes. You know, average cooler full of samples take a lab about 30 minutes for them to enter all that data. Well, with our barcode, we'll be able to cut that to about 5 minutes. And then there'll be no typos, right? The only typos that occur will happen in the field as they're entering data. So labs like that concept. And then our electronic chain of custody is a little bit different than anyone else is doing it. We're going to have 3-part authentication on our chain of custody. It's going to have, the first part is going to be determined like when you transfer custody. It's going to be based on a username and password. You'll be able to transfer custody off of 2 devices, transfer between 2 devices, or transfer on 1 device. So we both will log in to our accounts on the one single device. The second part of the authentication is going to be a signature. So you're going to sign your name with your fingertip on the device. And then the third part is going to be taking a photo using the front-facing camera, so that it basically is 3-part authentication to verify the transfer of custody, which no one's doing out there. We've got a patent pending on it. So just as a kind of a notice to anyone thinking about it.
Okay. We won't let anyone know. This is just between right. You and me.
Okay.
and YouTube.
Yeah. And then so that's kind of the chain of custody part of it. And then using that same Bluetooth printer, we're able to print out custody seals. So if you want to seal that cooler and make sure it's not tampered with, you'll be able to print out a kind of separate but similar custody seal with a barcode on it, so that you know, when you ship via FedEx, wherever, you essentially able to verify that the cooler hasn't been opened. Or if it's so.
I'm sorry, you just dropped for a moment.
Thank you, Charter Communications.
You were saying that that you take a face. What was the last thing you just said?
So front-facing, you know, the cameras all have front. Yeah. Mobile devices all have a front-facing camera now.
Yeah.
So you take a picture of the person who's taking custody. You know, who's ever transferring custody. It's just to verify that custody is transferred from one person to the other. So you have 3-part authentication: the username and password, the signature, and then the front-facing camera picture of the person's face. Right. So that you know, it's basically, and then coupled with what's called an immutable database. An immutable database means that all these records are all stored in the cloud in a file structure that is uneditable. So it's just a series of, you know, every time there's transfer, it's recorded, and so that there's no way to edit that after it's been recorded.
Wow.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
That's pretty neat.
Yeah. And there's, like I said, there's no one doing anything like it, and we think this is really the solution that most labs and people have been looking for. There's been this kind of push for electronic chain of custody, which you're probably aware of, but no one's really come up with a solution that's been able to satisfy all the users. A lot of people don't want to participate in it because they're like, "What's in it for me?" Well, the users, we have kind of that, we filled that gap. What's in it for the user is the fact that we're able to provide the reporting on the back end. So unless you do the chain of custody on the front end and the sample bottle labels on the front end, you're not going to get the reporting in the back end. So
okay.
It literally is an incentive for people to participate.
Sure. I think that you know, people, especially in an industry where one wrong step and you lose, you know, your profitability for a whole project.
Right.
There is the incentive of doing things the way we know they work versus somebody coming and saying, well, I've got this new system that will do what you want to do better. And you might say, well, it's been working fine for me for a long time. But what I don't think that they're taking into account is the cost savings, the error catching.
Right.
These are so important. They're part of the reason why these jobs are at such a low at such a low profit to begin with.
Right.
Because to give some context to your service and your software, how it would typically work is that, let's say I'm a project manager and I'm doing groundwater, soil and groundwater sampling, but we'll just say groundwater. at a site in a city to, you know, a city 20 miles away.
Right.
Okay. And, you know, I'm a small business and I'm trying to gain more projects, more clients. And I get to a point where I need someone to sample my sites for me, but I don't have enough sites at the moment to hire somebody full time, because I just don't know where the market's going to go. I don't know how long these sites are going to last. You don't sample these sites forever. Oftentimes, there's a set amount of time that they get sampled, and then they come up clean, and then it's over. So you were making money and employing somebody, and then you're not employing somebody.
Right.
It's a pain for the employer. It's obviously a pain for the employee who's getting hired and then let go multiple times. What your sampling service does is subs that part out. So you say, we don't do the project management part. You know, leave that to you. We are, you know, we're like the repairman. You know, you don't hire a full-time repairman to sit in your house. You have a problem, and the repairman comes and solves it for you, and then charges you some money and leaves.
Right.
And this allows me as a small business owner to focus on what I'm good at, which is the project management and the client acquisition and all those other things, and let the you know, the stuff that is essentially prescribed, because in the environmental sampling is prescribed. It has to be done a certain way. It has to be done a certain time, certain place. Everything needs to be written a certain way. You really need a professional that's doing that all the time to be good.
Yeah.
So that's what your service provides. And then what you're talking about now with the software is taking that information, or basically allowing me to enter a very simple. I've seen your website; it's great.
Yeah.
Enter, you know, okay, I need five, you know, samples for PAHs, and one for lead, and one for this, and one for that, and I just, you know, click submit what day I want it done, and you guys go out and do it. And I know that I can hold you accountable for that if you sample the wrong thing, or it doesn't. Whereas if I'm doing it, what's going to happen? I have to pull up an old work order, because I don't have this magic you know, software solution that you have. I have to use an old Word document with all of the information. Inevitably I'm going to pull up an older one, since I'm not going to write it from scratch. I've got a million different things going on at the same time, so I may miss something. I may not include the right sample. I may include the wrong map. I may include the wrong. There's a whole different. Every single time I've got to think these things out and double and triple check a work order, which gets submitted to nobody but internally. So, you know, it's not like it's going out to a regulatory agency or to a client. This is just me writing down, sampler, these are the things that you need to do. But at the same time, it still needs to be double and triple checked, which the online form eliminates all that hassle.
Right.
And farms it off to somebody else.
And one of the other things that that we're doing with our software is we're actually the term's called white labeling. I don't know if you're familiar with that term or not, but we're actually going to allow other companies to essentially have our software with their logo and their label on it. For instance, there's a major automotive company that has asked us to white label our whole platform into with their logo on it, so that all of their consultants and everything, when they go and do sampling for this motor company, they'll essentially pull up that app and that platform, and either log into that particular website, and they'll be able to use our software just like they would if they're using our software, but it'll have a different logo on it.
Right.
So our plan is to kind of white label that and basically sell it to anybody who wants to have their own platform. And then obviously we're going to make a little money off of that too, and that's the whole point. But they'll be able to have their own individual platform with their logos on it, and a lot of labs are very interested in having their own app, basically. So that's kind of what we're going for. Is like, so every laboratory out there that wants to kind of get in the business that we're in, they'll be able to have their own app. So.
Okay, so we've talked near term, you want to release an app. You already have the software online, and you're already doing the sampling service. But in addition to that, you want to have this app that allows, easier communication, printing of labels on site, and these kinds of things. That's near term. Going further down the road, what do you think is coming next for you? Or if this is just what you're working on now, what do you think is next in the environmental field?
Well, two things. First, next, after we get this app rolled out, we're going to essentially create the ability to have what are called plugins or extensions, or it's basically an app within an app. So companies that are out there doing, say, fate and transport modeling, we're going to allow them to kind of take their fate and transport model and kind of plug it into our platform. So that if you have a site, a gas station site or whatever, and you want to be able to generate their generate a fate and transport model. Sorry about that, my dog just stopped in it for a moment. You want to generate a fate and transport model to see what where the contaminant's going to be 10, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years from now. You'll be able to do that right within our platform. Same thing, and if you needed like data validation services, or maybe you want to generate cross sections automatically. All that data will be in our platform, and these third-party plugins, for an additional fee, you'll be able to call those up and then generate those types of imaging. 3D modeling might be another area where people are going to want to be able to take that plume and then kind of create a 3D model so you could look at it. Since we'll have all that data, they'll be able to kind of purchase these add-on plugins and then be able to do that with that information. So that's one area that we're going to be expanding on in the near future.
Okay, cool.
Is creating those APIs so that people can plug their software into our platform. The other area where I see some potential development a little further down the road is just in technology and sensor technology. I believe that you'll see some of that laboratory analysis actually move to the field. As technology advances, right, as sensors become smaller and cheaper, we'll be able to take some of that. The biggest hurdle is going to be regulatory acceptance of these new methods, but we'll be able to go out and analyze for VOCs in the field right at the wellhead and be able to get a reliable result. And so once I think that happens, you'll see a huge renaissance in the environmental industry again, because we won't have to be shipping samples all over the place. You'll literally just go out to the field, get the result, and have that round of sampling done.
So I think we both know some lab executives who would be pretty upset by that.
Well,
if they don't get on board quick.
Well, that's the key. That's the key, and that goes back to what I said earlier. With change is opportunity.
Right.
So some people are going to be threatened by that. Some are going to be excited by that. So.
Right. Well, to me, it's exciting. I look forward to the day when we can go out with our smartphone with a little probe on it and stick it in the water and get all the information we need.
Right.
I know that's that's fantasy in the short term, but it's not necessarily fantasy in the long term.
Well, you're a little younger than me. I can remember when the cell phone was fantasy. So
there you go. So one fantasy latched onto another.
Yeah.
So let's see here. I had something that came to mind when we were talking about that, but I lost it. So we'll just move on to the next idea here. Oh, so you've mentioned all these things. What do you're not, there must be something that you wish people were doing in the industry, either technology side. Actually, wait, let me back up. I do remember what I was going to say.
Okay.
I've noticed in this quest for integration of new technology, I think initially I saw people in the industry being very very intransigent about we need to do things this way because this is the way it's always been done, and that was what I understood from the conversations that I had. But I think as time has moved on after the Environmental Tech Summit, after talking to a lot more people about it, definitely the regulatory, the way the regulations are right now, and the environment that they're in, that is a big big hurdle. It seems to me that all of these environmental regulations were put in place, and then you've got people who are very loath to reevaluate them because they're afraid to upset the public. Sometimes they lower, as better data comes out, they might say, well, this isn't as dangerous as we thought it was, so we're going to change the cleanup target levels, or we're going to do this or that. And it gets politicized and it becomes a political football. People just want, and innovation is not a part of that.
Right.
I wish, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know many environmental lawyers. We did have one at the Tech Summit, and it was very happy to see that he saw the value in changing this. But I think that's one aspect of our, if you were look at it, a trinity of technologists, environmental consultants, and the third leg has got to be environmental regulatory.
Right. And that's what I alluded to earlier, is that when this sensor technology moves into the field, it's the biggest hurdle we're going to face is getting the regulators to accept the new technology. You're going to have to prove it, 100 times over, and not necessarily, and even from state to state to state. Some states are going to be quicker to adopt it than other states. But, it's up to the people kind of developing the technology to keep pushing and, create an argument for your case that's, going to be convincing. There's that one company out there, they were at the Environmental Tech Summit, that has they can test for different concentrations with like a little titrations test. You know what they're called? I forget their name.
The one with the vials that they do in the field?
Correct, yeah. Yeah, and so...
Hanby.
Hanby, correct, Hanby, yep. And I was trying to tell him, I'm like, until you get regulatory acceptance of this method, you're not going to get wide, you can go to all the trade shows you want, but, people are going to have to get it accepted and approved by the regulators.
Right.
And so, I even offered to help him, hey, we'll collect some samples, groundwater samples, and at the same time we'll do one of these little tests, and then we'll be able to compare,
Right.
and then help him gather the evidence to make the case to the various state regulators. So, and some states they're not going to even allow a test that was conducted in a different state to be accepted in their state, even though the science is the same. So, and we work all over the country, so I'm like, I'd be happy to help you out on your case studies.
Right.
So
I guess in addition to the summit, we need to have an advocacy arm.
Right.
Not just an advocacy for innovation, advocacy for trying something new.
Right.
And not that we want to change regulations, to make them easier or harder, or just that we know there's certain technology that takes 20 years to solve a problem, and there's other technology that takes 3 years to solve a problem. Who's to say that there isn't a technology right around the corner that can clean up a site in a week? I don't know.
Right.
But if we don't look into it, if we penalize innovators in the space, in the environmental industry, that may never come along.
Right.
So
yeah, and it's all about kind of understanding like the opposition you're going to face. And I wouldn't necessarily say it's ignorance, but it's the people, regulators tend to be set in their ways, like, hey, this is the regulation we've been following for the last 25 years. We're not just going to change it overnight, and I agree with, but the fast pace of technology and the science, it's moving a lot faster than the regulators are able to move. And we need to figure out a way to help keep the regulators and get them up to speed with the new science and new technology.
Yeah, definitely. So how can we encourage more people to learn about new technologies in the environmental industry? How can we encourage other people to have a forward-thinking mindset?
Well, I think what we're doing right now, getting on YouTube and be able to spread the word and share this kind of stuff. I think people are just generally interested in technology. They don't necessarily always want to get into the weeds in terms of the exact science behind everything, but they like to learn about things in general. And then, for guys like me and guys like you, we like to see how you can take that science or technology and leverage it against like a business model. So it's not just the science or the technology, it's how the two integrate. How do you use it to make money?
Right, sure.
If you can use technology and make money, that becomes a little more interesting to most people, right? I mean, it's like, hey, I get to kind of get my geek on and make a little money at the same time. How cool is that? So, it's like taking those two lessons and then showing the world, hey, this is good for the environment and it's good for your pocketbook too.
Right. Yeah. So now, obviously, we've talked about how we have felt a pushback from the industry at times. Do you have any funny stories about you're selling this service that's going to save people time and money, make their business more efficient? What are some of the silly responses that you've gotten from people?
Well, probably the story I tell the most is and this was years ago, all right? So it's probably like 2004, I'm guessing, somewhere in there. And I went to this oil company, talking to the president of the company. They were a jobber, relatively large jobber in Michigan, probably have 100 different gas stations. And I'm going on and on about our database, and we're gonna, be able to do their sampling. We'll put a lot of the data online and help them generate reports in a much more efficient manner. And I'm like, but don't worry. I'm like, your data's safe and secure. It's all username and password protected. It's going to be in the cloud. And I, went on for 30 minutes describing our software and how it all works. And then I ended with, okay, do you have any questions? And he just kind of said, yeah, what's a username? and it just occurred to me, like, everything I had said over the last 30 minutes just went right over this guy's head. He was very polite, and he sat there and listened to me. He had no clue what I was talking about.
Oh, boy.
And it's hard for us to, like, in this day, to sit back and realize, like, people didn't know what a username and password was. But it's, it's true. I mean, it wasn't until probably about 2004, 2005 that, most people ended up getting an email. So, so it's probably my funniest story.
Okay, well, that's a pretty good one, I have to say. What's a username? That's a tough hill to climb. Did you sell that one?
No. To this day. Actually, they ended up ended up selling to another larger oil company. So
okay. So
yeah. So we're still working on it.
Okay, that's funny. I can imagine that would be a tough sell if they don't even know what a username is.
Right.
So, and I know you're currently expanding over the country. You're expanding into Florida. You're expanding westward, I think, even in Hawaii.
Yeah, talking to a guy about opening an office in Hawaii. Yeah.
That's exciting. It's exciting.
Yeah.
So, are you gonna travel to Hawaii once a quarter?
Well, that would be the goal, I think.
You have to make sure the operations are going well.
Yeah, it's going to take a week or two.
That's right. Bring your surfboard.
I have to bring my girlfriend too.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Well, that's I think gonna wrap us up for the interview. Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, I appreciate it. This has been fun.
Yes, definitely. So I'm going to stop the broadcast now. Before we go, anybody who's watching, thank you so much. Please subscribe. We're going to have more of these coming in the coming weeks. And have some other people on, other people I met at the Environmental Tech Summit, other people in the environmental industry who are trying to change the way the environmental industry is going from, basically from the 80s mentality to the 2010s and beyond mentality. So help us bring it along, share, like, subscribe, and thanks so much. And Russell, I'm going to end the broadcast, but we can continue talking.
Okay, great.